My name is Greg Veeser. I'm a producer at Headcase VR.
And I'm Andrew Shulkind. I'm a cinematographer and leading product development at Headcase VR.
Lots and lots and lots of experimenting. We experiment all the time with brand new cameras, different ways to use the cameras. Right now, we've just bought three really great new cameras that we're taking apart all the way down, like disassembling to the lowest level to see what works, what doesn't work. It's a lot of experimenting and a lot of just trying to make things work. You know, we're on our own.
I think also because we come from a traditional, filmmaking environment, it's kind of about how do we bring all the things that we've been doing over the last 100 years and either reinvent them entirely, find out what we take and leave and what's valuable from before in terms of how we tell stories, because that's something that we're particularly focused on is storytelling in this space, in spherical, in 360.
I think that we're going to figure out ways to really transport viewers and take them to a place that they've never been. It's going to become a lot more vivid, a lot more realistic, and a lot easier. And when you put on these headsets, you can be underwater, you can be in outer space, you can be back in time, and you'll truly believe it. You'll really feel like you're there. Right now it's good, and it's a good approximation, it's a fun ride, but when the technology gets to the point that it's impossible to see the technology, it's going to be just whatever the storyteller can think of, the viewer can experience.
I think the idea of virtual reality, for anyone who hasn't put it on, is so opens you up to a new kind of perspective. And as amazing and incredible as it is, there's still a lot of limitations. And so I think one of the biggest limitations on the capture side of things is because we're really more focused on the live action end of things as opposed to gaming or kind of the CG aspect of it. Those find their ways into what we do, but it's more kind of to help along the technology that being able to, using either light field technology, using other technologies that allow us to put a real live action element, a person or a prop or something in a CG background, or the inverse, put a prop in a live action background. That's kind of where the future is going in the short term, and then who knows beyond that.
It's great. We've been to this 3 times. The first time was about a year and a half ago, and it was in a office that was not much bigger than this room, and nobody, there was just nothing to do and see. 6 months ago, we presented at VRLA, and it was great. It was here at the convention center, but it was smaller, and it wasn't as crowded, and today it's crazy. I mean, it's literally doubled in size every time, and it's a great confirmation that this technology that we got into and started Headcase over is paying off, and that people really are interested in it. They really do want to be thrown into interesting worlds and learn in new ways and communicate with people in a totally different environment. That like the growth has not slowed, and it's getting more intense, and that's great. So I think that everyone who gets involved in VR is picked a winner, because it's something that's going to change the world in the next few years.
And there's so many different ways of experiencing VR in this space. There's all the different applications, half of which are live action, the other half are gaming, or maybe it's 70% gaming and 30% live action as that starts to kind of grow. And I think that there's all different kinds of ways of experiencing it, and that's why you come to VRLA, to kind of understand what's at the forefront of technology, because the forefront changes every week. Every week there's a new announcement, every week there's some new test that we've completed or someone else has completed that kind of advances the business forward. Personally, I think that it's sad to say that film as a theater experience will be going away. I think inevitably it will down the line, not in the next 10 years, but beyond that. And I think that there's no way that once you put on a VR headset or experience it, and however you're experiencing it, that you can't say that won't be a part of the future of our children's, our grandchildren's future. It will find some way in some way, and probably a lot of different ways. And I think it's for the entertainment business and for the technology business. On the consumer side and on the professional side, it's a huge growth market. So there's an incentive just from those manufacturers to kind of build that.
I think they're going to coexist. Andrew and I are both filmmakers in the regular film and TV world, as well as VR. And I think that in the same way that radio and television sort of coexist now, television didn't replace radio, television didn't replace the theater, they sort of will grow and adapt. I think that going to the movies is a social experience. You go on a date, You go with a bunch of friends. You go to a comedy because you want to hear everyone laugh at the same time. You go to a horror movie on opening night because everyone screams and it's fun. VR is really immersive, so much that you forget where you are, you forget that your friends are around you, you're sort of in this own world and you can travel places. So they're both ways of entertaining you, and they're both ways of telling a story to an audience, but I think that they're really different. I don't want to see a comedy by myself, snickering alone in my dark room, it's weird. I want to go with thousands of other people who are laughing too. So they're going to exist and they're going to feed each other as well. Movie experiences will then show up on VR, and VR experiences will grow into movies. But they can cohabitate.
I think, let me add one more thing. I think there's something different about, there's the theatrical experience, which is either in the theater or in your home. Now people have these big home theaters or have big screens. There's that. And then there's this, which is something quite different. It's really a different experience entirely. That should be distinguished.
We love it because to simplify it, you get 4 screens at the same time: front, back, left, and right, and up. I mean, really 5, 6 if you get really creative and go down. So you can have a really complicated story going on with lots of elements, characters and background, special effects, cars, whatever you want, and you don't expect the viewer to catch it all the first time. You can't. So you make a great main story, and then you have a lot of supplemental stories going on, which makes the viewer want to watch it again and again and again and pick up details that they didn't pick up before. We have a zombie experience that we worked on. We partnered with Fox, and they hired Headcase because we had so much cinematic experience. And we placed little lights and effects and creatures and scares in all the different corners, and we choreographed it so you couldn't catch all the bad guys in the first viewing. You had to watch it again and again and turn around and look in different directions. That's a great thing because the viewer becomes the cameraman. They pan left, they pan right, they tilt up and down, and it really gets them more involved. And the more involved you are, the bigger the payoff is, the bigger the scream or the bigger the laughter. So it's a great challenge to try to write 4 times as much story and 4 times as much content when we're making VR for Headcase.
Yeah, I think like Greg was saying, the idea of the viewer being the viewer. I mean, the viewer is the one who gets to decide if they're looking here or here or here, and if you've only blocked it, action to be in one place, and they miss it, you failed as a storyteller in that way, unless that's something that you're going for, where you're lucky if you see the action. You really have to think about it in a totally new way, and that's one of the things that we like because it's exciting to do. I mean, we all know how to tell a story here, and there are many stories that are still yet to be told, but the idea of telling a story in the round is a completely new experience and incredibly liberating for a viewer, because once you're in the world, suddenly you're so immersed in the experience that you're making choices you're making choices within the context of that story, as opposed to watching it and where you're able to kind of get up and go to the bathroom, or you can kind of opt out a little bit in a regular movie-going experience. You're in the middle of it, and you're in a gunfight, or you're in a basement, or you're at a football game, or whatever you're doing. You are there, and you start thinking and making choices and looking around in the way you would as if you were actually there, and that's what's different, I think.
We went to film school together, so this feels like a homework assignment we would have had to do. Eisenstein did Potemkin, right? Yeah. Okay, so I'm not that, I got a B. I think you would love VR. We, in our content at Headcase, are all filmmakers. Andrew, myself, Lucas Foster, who's produced dozens of action movies, Jim Langlois, who's an editor trained by Steven Spielberg, and a bunch of other guys. Murata is partners with us, and Guillermo del Toro is their founder. So we have a lot of filmmakers, and we love using all of the filmmaking tools, including editing. And in our experience that we did for FX, there's lots of edits designed to scare you and to get to the action quicker. And we cut. A lot of VR companies are afraid to cut, and we've never been like that. So with Eisenstein developing all that, really forward-thinking editing that at the time was crazy, he would love VR because he'd be able to, experiment in this medium in the same way that he experimented in regular film. I think all directors would bring their particular brand of storytelling. You're saying, all the in-camera stuff that Wells did, and all the weird angles Wells used that were very impressionistic and first person. He loved VR because no matter where you put the camera, it really changes the emotional impact. So every filmmaker would bring their own tools. VR magnifies it and makes it even more, enjoyable.
It's a fun thing to think about, what directors would think about with these different, how they would approach VR and how they would use it. I mean, I think someone like Eisenstein would. I think someone like Kubrick would hate it. And I think at the same time, because you can't style it in the same way. You're not curating what they're looking at, and it's a different kind. It's like it's almost a different medium than film. You know, you still have the same roles, but the director is no longer forcing your eye. The cinematographer is no longer urging you to look in this direction, highlighting things. You can, and you can use color and brightness and different kind of tricks to focus the attention, camera movement to focus your eye in places. But it's such a user-focused experience that it's sort of like you have to give this person these options, and it's really more. Greg says a lot. It's a lot like a stage play. It's almost more of a theater experience where you're kind of in an actively moving, like Shakespeare in the Park. That's like kind of always meandering through, and you're an active participant in that. So I think it takes a different piece of your mind to kind of shape the narrative or shape the experience, thinking about the viewer in ways and thinking about the viewer much more than we usually do in the regular space.
We hope you guys embrace it too. I think that there's the first part about learning about VR is you have to unlearn everything you've learned about film technique, about film history, about filmmaking, and you have to start from scratch, which is a great experience because none of the old rules apply, and anyone can get into VR. Anyone who's an expert in film is probably not going to adapt well to VR. It's a whole new set of rules. And so I think by simply getting a Ricoh Theta or any of these devices that does homemade stitching for you and using your iPhone and your cell phone and your Samsung or whatever it is, getting a Google Cardboard, like people who start creating in their own backyards are going to come up with really cool ways of telling VR stories that we've never thought of before. And anyone can do it. It's very democratized. It gets expensive later and it gets complex later, but it's really easy at home to just play around and invent this first-person storytelling.
I think another important note is that there's a piece of gaming, which is obviously as international as movies are. There's a piece of gaming that really drives this, and if you can kind of think about what it's like to be a first-person shooter or to be kind of inside of a video gaming experience, you kind of understand what it means to be inside of the VR sphere, and that's number one. And number two, I think, is that it's very easy to take get a rig, and put it on a beach somewhere, or to put it on a mountaintop. I mean, that is VR, but I think that's not really using it to its best, in its most successful way. I think that finding ways of telling stories and finding reasons to tell a story in VR, it's not right for everything. And kind of understanding when we do it and when we don't is important. And I think maybe the most important thing about VR to me, if you're talking about it in an international context, and how is it the same to you and to someone in Lebanon and someone in Asia and somewhere else, is that we can all have the kind of same collective experience. So I put The Strain, a project that we shot on you, or I put another project we shot on somebody else. You can see exactly what we saw when we were there, and a movie forces you to kind of or other experiences, other kind of piece of entertainment, force you to kind of process that through your own filter. This just puts you there. You're in the middle of a tennis court, I'm in the middle of a tennis court, and by kind of creating these experiences, we can all have a kind of collective experience that's the same, or that's curated for somebody wherever they are. I mean, you could be in the middle of the Hagia Sophia and have a story there. You could be in the middle of Stonehenge and understand that. You can be in a tulip field, and now I know exactly what it's like to be there. And I think that kind of that there's a way of kind of making our borders a little bit more invisible in that way.